He thought she was a criminal until he saw her cry beside her mother's bed. Before we begin, drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this emotional story. Officer Jake Mitchell had his hands on a woman's shoulders, pressing her against the cold hospital wall. Handcuffs dangled from his belt, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Her mascara ran in black rivers down her cheeks as she sobbed, her voice breaking with desperation. "Please, I just need 5 more minutes with her." Jake's voice was ice. "That's what they all say. You're coming with me." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed right there in the hallway, her whole body shaking. "She's dying. My mother is dying." For just a second, Jake's hand trembled on those handcuffs. Just 1 second. Then his jaw clenched, his training kicked back in, and he reached down to pull her to her feet. But before we understand how we got here, we need to go back. 24 hours earlier, Jake Mitchell was 34 years old, a decorated police officer in Seattle, and the most predictable man you'd ever meet. Every morning started the same way. 5 a.m. alarm. Gym by 5:30. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. And before every single shift, he'd open the small wooden box on his kitchen counter and look at his father's police badge. His apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a man who lived alone and liked it that way. Spotless, organized, empty. His phone would light up with text messages from friends inviting him to dinner, to drinks, to anything that involved being around other human beings. He'd read them. He'd never respond. On his mantle sat a framed photograph of a man in a police uniform, the same strong jaw, the same serious eyes. Jake would pour his coffee every morning and talk to that picture like his father could still hear him. "Another day, Pops. I'll make you proud." At the precinct, they called him by the book Mitchell. Not as a compliment, as a warning. Jake Mitchell didn't bend rules. He didn't show emotion. He didn't believe in second chances or gray areas. The world was simple to him. Criminals and victims, wrong and right, black and white. His partner, Officer Rodriguez, a 15-year veteran with laugh lines and a patient smile, would shake his head during their patrols. "You know it's okay to be human sometimes, right, Mitchell?" Jake's response never changed. Being human gets people killed. And he believed that, because when Jake was 19 years old, his father, Detective Robert Mitchell, trusted the wrong person during an undercover operation. A confidential informant promised information, swore they'd turned over a new leaf, begged for one more chance. Jake's father gave it to them. 3 days later, Robert Mitchell was shot twice in the chest in an abandoned warehouse. He died before the ambulance arrived. That's when Jake learned his lesson. Trust no one. Follow the rules. The moment you start making exceptions, the moment you let your guard down, someone dies. So Jake lived in his pristine, lonely apartment, spoke only to a photograph, and kept every single person in his life at arm's length. It was safer that way, for everyone. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Silent alarm at Mercy General Hospital Pharmacy Wing. Jake and Rodriguez were 2 blocks away. They arrived in under 3 minutes, Jake already scanning the building, his hand instinctively checking his service weapon. The hospital at night is a strange place. Too bright and too quiet at the same time. Their footsteps echoed off the linoleum as they made their way to the pharmacy entrance. The door was ajar, the lock clearly forced open. Jake signaled Rodriguez to cover the exit and pushed inside. That's when he saw her. A woman, 29, maybe 30 years old. Worn jeans with a hole in one knee. An oversized gray hoodie, hood pulled up. Hair falling out of a messy ponytail. And she was stuffing medication bottles into a canvas bag as fast as her shaking hands could move. She looked desperate. They always did. The woman's back was to him, but the moment his boots squeaked on the floor, she spun around. Her eyes went wide. In her hand was a bottle of medication, the kind Jake knew cost more than most people made in a month. The label read Cardizem, heart medication, expensive heart medication. Jake's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Step away from the bag. Hands where I can see them." Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, filled with fresh tears. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Jake interrupted, his hand moving to his cuffs. Hands. Now. For a moment, Sarah Bennett, though Jake didn't know her name yet, just stared at him. Then she did something Jake didn't expect. She ran. She bolted past him, faster than he anticipated, her bag clutched to her chest. Jake swore under his breath and took off after her. They tore through the hospital corridors, past startled nurses doing their rounds, past patient rooms where people slept unaware of the chase happening outside their doors. Sarah's shoes squeaked on the polished floors as she rounded corners, heading deeper into the hospital. Jake was faster, his training giving him the advantage, but she knew this building. She ducked through a staff-only door, then another, leading him through a maze of hallways. They were near the ICU now, the critical care wing where the sickest patients fought for their lives behind closed doors. Jake closed the distance, his hand reaching out, grabbing the back of her hoodie. She stumbled, and he caught her, both of them crashing against the wall, but Jake making sure she didn't get hurt. His training took over. Firm but controlled, he spun her around, ready to cuff her hands behind her back. Sarah was sobbing now, not fighting anymore, just crying so hard her whole body shook. That's when an elderly nurse appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. She was maybe 65, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen everything a hospital could throw at her. "Officer, wait." Jake didn't even look at her. "Ma'am, step back. This is police business." But Sarah's voice cut through, desperate and broken. "Room 304. Please, just let me check on room 304. The nurse, whose name tag read Helen, stepped closer, her voice firm despite Jake's warning. "That's her mother's room, Margaret Bennett, stage for heart failure." Jake paused, just for a second. He looked down at the bag Sarah had dropped, medication bottles spilling out onto the floor. He bent down, picked one up. Cardizem, then another. Nitroglycerin, another. Digoxin, all heart medication. All of it expensive. All of it exactly what someone with end-stage heart failure would need. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now. The insurance denied her. They said the treatment is experimental. They said there's nothing more they can do. I couldn't just watch her die. Jake's face hardened. This was the part where criminals told their sob stories, where they expected sympathy, where they thought a sad tale would make their crime disappear. "So you steal? You break the law." Sarah lifted her head, and for the first time, she looked directly into his eyes. Really looked at him. "Wouldn't you, if it was someone you loved?" And just like that, an image flashed through Jake's mind. His father's badge, the funeral, the flag folded into a triangle. The officer's words. He died doing what he believed in. Jake shook his head, pushing the memory away. "The law doesn't have exceptions. You're under arrest." Helen stepped forward again, her hand on Jake's arm. "She's been here every day for 3 weeks, sleeping in that chair by her mother's bed. She works 2 jobs. Every penny goes to her mother's care. She's not a criminal, officer." "She committed a crime," Jake said flatly. "That makes her a criminal." Sarah stopped struggling. She just went completely limp in his grip, all the fight draining out of her like someone had pulled a plug. Her voice was so quiet Jake almost didn't hear her. "Just let me say goodbye first, please." And there it was, the moment Jake hated most. When they stopped being a suspect and became a person. When the black and white started bleeding into gray. If you're feeling this story in your heart right now, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button for the Rich Tides channel. Because what happens next is going to change everything for both of them, and you won't want to miss a single moment. But here's what I want to know from you. If someone you loved was dying, and the only way to save them was to break the law, would you do it? Let me know in the comments below. Jake stood there in that hospital corridor, handcuffs still in his hand, looking at this woman who just asked for 5 minutes to say goodbye to her dying mother. Every instinct he'd spent 15 years developing told him to do his job. Cuff her, read her rights, process her. But something else, something he'd buried deep a long time ago, whispered differently. 5 minutes, he finally said, his voice rough. I'll be right outside the door. Sarah's head snapped up, disbelief written all over her tear-stained face. She didn't wait for him to change his mind. She scrambled to her feet and rushed through the door marked 304. Jake positioned himself by the window, arms crossed, watching. He told himself it was procedure. Keep the suspect in sight. But that wasn't why he was watching. Through the glass, he could see Margaret Bennett, 58 years old, but she looked 70. Her skin had that gray pallor that comes when your heart can barely push blood through your body anymore. Tubes ran from her arms. Monitors beeped a steady rhythm beside her bed. An oxygen cannula sat beneath her nose. She was sleeping, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths that looked like they took everything she had. Sarah sat in the chair beside the bed, the same chair she'd apparently been sleeping in for 3 weeks. She took her mother's hand so gently, like she was afraid even that small touch might break her. Her lips moved, whispering words Jake couldn't hear through the glass. Then Sarah started crying. Not the desperate, panicked sobs from earlier. These were different, quiet, broken, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep inside you that it shakes your entire body. The kind of crying that happens when you're watching the person who gave you life slowly lose theirs. Jake felt something crack inside his chest. Just a little, just enough to hurt. That's when Helen appeared beside him, her arms crossed, matching his stance. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching the same scene he was watching. Her father left when she was 10, Helen said quietly. Just walked out one day and never came back. Margaret raised her alone, worked 3 jobs sometimes. Went to night school to get her GED while Sarah did her homework at the diner where Margaret waited tables. Jake didn't respond, but he was listening, really listening. Helen continued, her voice soft but steady. Sarah put herself through nursing school, works at Mercy General during the day, picks up shifts at a clinic in Tacoma 3 nights a week. Every single penny she makes goes to her mother's care. The co-pays, the medications that insurance won't cover, the specialists. Everything. Then why steal? Jake's voice was harder than he meant it to be. Why not find legal help? There are programs, charities, fundraisers. Helen turned to look at him, and her eyes were sad. You think she hasn't tried? Applications to every foundation in the state. A GoFundMe that barely raised $3,000. Charity programs with waiting lists 6 months long. Her mother has maybe 2 weeks left. Officer. The system is too slow. And when you're watching someone you love slip away, 2 weeks might as well be 2 hours. Jake's jaw clenched. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to understand. Understanding made everything complicated. But then he did something that surprised even himself. He opened the door to room 304 and stepped inside. Sarah's head jerked up, her hand instinctively tightening around her mother's. I'm ready, she said, her voice hollow. You can take me now. Jake stood awkwardly by the door, his hands shoved in his pockets. Tell me about her. Sarah blinked. What? Your mother. Jake moved slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something fragile. Tell me about her. Sarah stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. Then, slowly, she started talking. She taught me to bake on Saturday mornings, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. We'd wake up early, before the sun came up, and she'd let me crack the eggs. I always got shells in the bowl, and she'd fish them out without ever making me feel bad about it. We'd make cinnamon rolls, and the whole apartment would smell like sugar and butter. Jake sat down in the chair by the door. He didn't know why. He just did. She worked as a waitress at 3 different diners. Then she'd come home and clean office buildings at night. On weekends, she worked the line at a factory that made airplane parts. I don't think I ever saw her sleep more than 4 hours at a time. Sarah's voice got quieter. But she never missed a single school play, not one. Even if she had to leave work early and lose those hours, she'd be there in the front row, still wearing her waitress uniform, clapping louder than anyone else. Jake's jaw was so tight it hurt. Her dream was to see me graduate nursing school, Sarah continued, and now her voice was breaking. She'd say, baby girl, you're going to help people. You're going to make a real difference." And she made it. She was there, front row again, wearing this yellow dress she'd been saving for a year. She bought it on clearance and hid it in her closet like it was made of gold. When they called my name, she stood up and cheered so loud the whole auditorium heard her. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. I became a nurse because of her, because she taught me that caring for people, really caring, matters more than anything else in the world. The irony of that statement, sitting here in this room with a police officer who'd just caught her stealing medication, wasn't lost on either of them. "And now I'm throwing it all away," Sarah said. "My license, my career, maybe my freedom. But I'd do it again. I'd do it 1,000 times. Jake leaned forward. "Why?" Sarah looked directly at him, and her answer was simple and devastating. "Because love isn't logical, officer. It doesn't follow rules or wait for permission. It doesn't care about consequences or legal systems or proper channels. When someone you love is dying, you don't think. You just act." Silence filled the room, heavy and thick. Then Margaret stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy and confused at first. She saw Sarah, and her whole face softened. Baby girl. But then she saw Jake. The uniform, the badge. Panic flashed across her face, and suddenly the monitors started beeping faster. What's happening?" Sarah grabbed her mother's hand with both of hers. "It's okay, Mom. Everything's okay. Just breathe. Please, just breathe." Margaret's eyes, frightened and desperate, locked onto Jake. "Please," she said, and her voice was so breathless it barely made sound. "Please don't take her. She's all I have. She's all I have in this world." Jake stood there, frozen. This dying woman, this stranger who'd worked 3 jobs and saved for a year to buy a yellow dress, was begging him not to take away the only person she had left. Her words hit him like a physical blow, cracking through every wall he'd built over the last 15 years. He turned and walked out of the room. In the hallway, Jake pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed his captain. It rang 3 times before Captain Morrison picked up. "Mitchell? It's almost midnight. What's going on?" Jake explained the situation. All of it. The theft, the dying mother, the desperation, the gray area that was making his head spin. Captain Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What's your gut telling you, Mitchell?" Jake looked through the window at Sarah holding her mother's hand. "That the law isn't always justice." "Then you know what you need to do," Morrison said. "But it's your badge on the line. Your call. I'll back whatever decision you make." The line went dead. Jake stood in that hallway, his phone still pressed to his ear, wrestling with himself. In his mind, he heard his father's voice, clear as day. A memory from when Jake was 16, riding in the patrol car, his dad teaching him what it meant to be a cop. "Jake, being a good cop isn't about the rule book. It's about doing right by people. The badge doesn't make you good. Your choices do." But then another memory crashed in. His father's funeral. Jake, 19 years old, standing in the rain watching them lower the casket. The captain explaining how his father had trusted someone, given them a second chance, and that choice had gotten him killed. The lesson Jake had learned that day: trust gets you killed. Compassion gets you killed. Following your heart instead of the rules gets you killed. Duty versus compassion. Fear versus faith. The rule book versus the right thing. Jake took a deep breath and walked back into room 304. Sarah stood up immediately, her body rigid, ready for what came next. Ready for the handcuffs, the arrest, the end of everything. Jake's voice was steady. "The medication you took is worth about $4,000. Hospital policy requires prosecution for any theft over $1,000. Sarah nodded, tears already streaming down her face. But Jake kept talking. "But I spoke to the pharmacy director while I was outside. She's willing to classify this as a medication error if everything is returned within 24 hours. Sarah's eyes went wide. "What?" "I'm giving you 24 hours, Jake said. "Return what you took, and let me help you find a legal solution." "Why?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Why would you do this for me?" Jake glanced at Margaret, still sleeping, her hand in her daughter's. Because someone once told me that caring for people matters more than following a rulebook. Sarah's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the chair and started crying again. But this time it was different. This time it was relief so intense it looked like pain. "But I need you to trust me," Jake said. "Can you do that?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Jake pulled out his phone. "I know a cardiologist at University Hospital, Dr. Patterson. He owes me a favor from a case I worked last year. Let me make some calls." What happened over the next 72 hours was nothing short of a miracle. But it wasn't the kind of miracle that just happens. It was the kind that someone makes happen. Jake Mitchell, the man who hadn't trusted anyone in 15 years, who lived alone and ate alone and kept everyone at arm's length, became a man on a mission. He worked his phone like his life depended on it. Maybe because he knew someone else's life did. He started with medical foundations. The Johnson Foundation for Heart Disease, the Seattle Medical Assistance Program, the Pacific Northwest Health Fund. He called every single one, explaining Margaret's case, pushing through bureaucratic red tape, refusing to take no for an answer. Then he went after the pharmaceutical companies, the ones who made the medications Margaret needed, the experimental treatments that insurance had denied. He didn't just call the customer service lines. He tracked down regional managers, medical liaisons, anyone who had the power to make a decision. And Jake Mitchell, by-the-book officer who never bent the rules, found himself bending every rule he could to save a woman he'd never even met. But the most surprising thing he did, he rallied his precinct. Jake walked into roll call on Wednesday morning and did something he'd never done before. He told them a story, not a case report, not a procedure update, a real story about a woman who was willing to sacrifice everything to save her mother, about love that didn't follow rules, about the gray areas that make us human. By Thursday afternoon, there was a collection jar in the break room labeled Badge of Honor Fund for Margaret Bennett. By Friday, every officer in the precinct had contributed. Rodriguez started a fundraiser page that spread through the Seattle Police Department like wildfire. Cops from precincts Jake had never even worked with were donating, sharing the story, spreading the word. Sarah watched all of this happen in disbelief. This stranger, this officer who'd arrested her 3 days ago, was fighting for her mother like she was his own family. Jake and Sarah spent long hours at the hospital together, waiting for callbacks, filling out applications, making calls, and somewhere in all that waiting, they started really talking. Not about the case, not about procedures or protocols, about real things, about loss and fear and what actually matters when you strip away all the noise. Jake told her about his father, about the funeral in the rain when he was 19, about the lesson he'd learned that day. "I stopped trusting people after he died," he said, staring at his coffee cup. "Seemed safer that way." Sarah's response was quiet. "Lonelier too, I bet." Jake looked up at her, and something passed between them. Yeah, lonelier too. They sat there in the hospital cafeteria, terrible coffee getting cold in their hands, and for the first time in 15 years, Jake felt like someone actually saw him. Not Officer Mitchell, not by-the-book Mitchell, just Jake. "Why are you really doing this?" Sarah asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because watching you with your mother, seeing how much you love her, how far you'd go for her, I saw what I lost when my dad died. Not just him, but the part of me that knew how to connect to people, how to care without being afraid." He met her eyes. "And I don't want you to lose what you have. I don't want you to end up like me." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The breakthrough came on Friday afternoon. Jake's phone rang, and he saw Dr. Patterson's name on the screen. He answered it with his heart pounding. The cardiologist had reviewed Margaret's case. The experimental treatment was risky, but it was her only shot. And Dr. Patterson was willing to perform the surgery pro bono. No charge, not a single dollar. But there was more. The pharmaceutical company that made the experimental medication had agreed to donate everything Margaret would need. The entire treatment covered. The fundraiser from the precinct had raised enough to cover the hospital costs, the recovery, everything else. It was all coming together. When Jake told Sarah, she just stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then she collapsed into his arms, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Jake held her, his own eyes burning with tears he hadn't let fall in over a decade. "She's going to make it," Sarah kept saying over and over. "She's going to make it." Margaret's surgery was scheduled for Saturday morning. Surgery day came and Sarah was a wreck. She paced the waiting room like a caged animal, her hands shaking, her face pale. The surgery was supposed to take 4 hours, maybe 5. Jake stayed with her the entire time. He brought her coffee she didn't drink, food she couldn't eat. He just sat there, a steady presence in her storm. "I can't lose her," Sarah whispered at hour 3. "She's all I have." Jake took her hand. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. "We barely know each other." Jake's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I've seen who you are in the hardest moment of your life. That's more than most people see in a lifetime." At hour 4 and 47 minutes, the surgeon emerged. Still in his scrubs, mask pulled down, looking tired but smiling. The surgery was successful. Margaret's going to recover. Sarah's knees buckled. Jake caught her before she hit the ground, and she clung to him like he was the only thing keeping her tethered to earth. They held each other right there in the waiting room, both of them crying now, a line crossed between strangers and something so much more. 2 weeks later, Margaret was sitting up in bed, and the gray pallor was gone from her skin. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her eyes were bright again, focused, alive. Sarah visited every day, of course. But Jake had started stopping by after his shifts, bringing Margaret crossword puzzles and telling her stories about his patrol that made her laugh. Margaret noticed everything. The way Jake looked at Sarah when she wasn't paying attention. The way Sarah's whole face lit up when Jake walked through the door. The way they sat just a little too close to each other, their hands finding reasons to touch. One afternoon, when Sarah was adjusting Margaret's pillows, Margaret caught her hand. "That young man, he's special." Sarah's cheeks flushed pink. "Mom!" "Don't mom me," Margaret said, and even weak from surgery, her voice had that mother's tone that meant business. "I see how he looks at you, like you're the sunrise after a long night." Sarah sat down on the edge of the bed. "He arrested me. This is literally the weirdest way to meet someone." Margaret laughed, a real laugh that made the monitors beep a little faster. The best love stories always are. That evening, Jake arrived with 2 cups of coffee. Margaret saw him coming through the window and immediately closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep. Sarah shot her a look that said, "I know what you're doing." But Margaret just kept her eyes closed, fighting back a smile. Jake handed Sarah her coffee. "How are you holding up?" "Better now that you're here," Sarah said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I mean, better now that Mom's recovering." "Obviously." Jake smiled. A real smile, not the tight professional one he usually wore. "Sarah, I've been thinking. I owe you everything. You showed me what I'd been missing. But I was wondering, maybe you could let me take you to dinner? When your mom's stronger. A real dinner. Not hospital cafeteria coffee." Sarah looked up at him. "Are you asking me on a date, Officer Mitchell?" "Jake. Just Jake." "And yes, I am." "I'd like that," Sarah said softly. Just Sarah and Jake. If the story is touching your heart, do us a favor and subscribe to the Rich Tides channel. Because stories like this, stories about real people finding each other in impossible circumstances, are what we're all about. And trust me, you'll want to see where Sarah and Jake's story goes from here. 3 months later, Margaret Bennett was standing in her own kitchen, healthy and strong, rolling out dough for cinnamon rolls. The yellow dress from Sarah's graduation hung in her closet, and she'd already worn it twice to Sunday dinner. The front door opened, and Sarah walked in, but she wasn't alone. Jake was right beside her, their hands intertwined, looking like they'd always been meant to fit together exactly like that. Margaret turned from her baking and opened her arms wide. "My 2 favorite people." She hugged them both, flour dusting their clothes, and nobody cared. Jake helped set the table like he'd done it 100 times before, completely at ease in this little kitchen that smelled like sugar and butter and home. Sarah stood in the doorway watching him laugh with her mother, watching him belong here, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Because here's the truth about people. Sometimes the ones who seem the hardest are just the most broken. Sometimes the person who follows every rule is actually desperate for a reason to break them. And sometimes breaking the rules is the most righteous thing you can do. Jake caught Sarah's eye across the table and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Sarah mouthed back, "For what?" Jake's answer was simple, "For teaching me to be human again." They sat down to dinner, the 3 of them, a makeshift family built from desperation and compassion and the kind of love that doesn't ask permission. They laughed and told stories and passed plates of food around a table that had been too empty for too long. And if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you'd see Sarah and Jake's hands find each other under that table. Fingers intertwined, holding on tight. 2 people who'd met in the worst possible way and found in each other the best possible thing. Because sometimes the greatest love stories start with handcuffs and hospital corridors. Sometimes they start with someone willing to risk everything for love. And sometimes, just sometimes, they start with a cop who finally learned that being human isn't a weakness. It's the only thing that matters. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever met someone in the most unexpected way and had them change your life? Share your story in the comments below. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more heart-touching stories coming your way soon.